Now, we're talking about the future of the state pension triple lock because Rishi Sunak at the weekend didn't say whether he would stick with it. The Labour Party at the TUC conference yesterday just pretty much dropped a heavy hint they might get rid of it.
They wouldn't commit to keeping it, would they?
That's right.
After the next election. So earlier on GB News Breakfast, Eamon and Isabel spoke to Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting about Labour's plans.
Probably lots of things that we would like to do that won't be in our manifesto because we simply won't be able to afford them. But on this issue of the triple lock, we'll visit that again closer to the election.
We'll visit that again.
Sitting on the fence completely. Somebody who is not going to sit on the fence is our very own GB News presenter and Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg, who has a fantastic show here at 8 o'clock. Jacob, good morning to you. We know you're not going to sit on the fence.
Good morning.
Good morning. You think the triple lock has to go. Tell us why.
The problem is our economy isn't growing, and you can't afford extra welfare payments unless you've got a growing economy to pay for it. Now, the issue with the triple lock is that it's 2.5% inflation, CPI inflation, or wages, and it means that every year it's always the highest figure. Now, I think you can continue with CPI inflation, which was how Margaret Thatcher did it when she came in 1979, but you can't give all three of those as a guarantee unless we can get economic growth or you increase the retirement age, which you may need to do anyway. But we currently have a welfare and a health budget that is becoming too big for the size of our economy.
But pensioners, Jacob, have struggled with the cost of living crisis like everybody else. They've paid into the system for years and years, and you're effectively saying perhaps their pension should fall back, not even keep up in line with wages growth.
Well, I think we've got to be clear that no one is suggesting that it shouldn't go up with inflation.
Right.
So that pensioners would maintain their current standard of living. That's really important, and everyone is advocating that. And I actually think the 2.5% part of the triple lock is reasonable as well. What I think is difficult is to make it inflation and wages, whichever is the higher of those, because if you look at working people, last year people in work got a pay increase that was below inflation, and this year they're getting one that is ahead of inflation. Now, it's their taxes that are paying the pensions. So 1 year they lost out, 1 year they benefited, and pensioners benefit in both years. And you have to ask, is that a fair balance between the working population and the retired population?
Is there any way, Jacob, that if the triple lock is removed, you could sell that to the pensioner voter? Is there anything else that you could offer? Could Jeremy Hunt turn around and say, your pension isn't going to increase by this amount, but we are going to do something else? How could they possibly sell this?
Well, what I think you might be able to do is to say that you could link it to GDP growth. Because if we could get back to 2.5% GDP growth, then that is, of course, real GDP growth. So inflation can be added on top of that. If you could say inflation plus GDP growth, so that your pension was remaining flat as a proportion of GDP, other than an increase in population, then I think you would have something you could offer to pensioners. It's slightly more complicated, but it would be affordable in the longer term.
I was going to say, Bevan and I are looking at each other here, Jacob. It's not very sexy on the doorstep,
That's not you say. If that's your best sales pitch, Jacob, I'm sorry. We're not buying it.
If GDP growth is up, you're going to get a good pension. It's not a very sexy line, is it?
No, but Andrew, this is the key. It hammers home the message that we need economic growth.
Right.
We have had a productivity problem in this country now for 20 years or more. We are not getting economic growth. We are not using the deregulatory advantages of leaving the European Union to get that economic growth. Some of the things Liz Truss was proposing last year to get economic growth are essential. And what we're currently doing is we're saying we want to afford all these nice-to-do things, which everyone's in favour of, but we're not saying how we're going to pay for them. And we've got to start saying to the electorate, this is how we're going to pay for them, and that's economic growth.
And the pensioner will say, it's not my problem if you lot haven't created any economic growth. I'm so sorry. I've worked really hard all my life. I'm expected to be able to buy the grandchildren an ice cream when we go out at the weekend, and it's all of these things which I will no longer be able to afford to do. I think it could be a massive vote loss for the Conservatives, this.
Well, I think that's misunderstanding what happens if you don't have the triple lock. Pensions would still go up in line with inflation. So last year they would still have gone up by about 10%.
It's about the sales,
and this year
though.
They would go up
That's
by
why
6.5%.
I know, but that's why my question was about, can you sell it to the voter? Because I think the subtlety, the nuance of what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but I think in terms of voters seeing a headline, the Tories took away the triple lock securing my pension, I think it has to be handled incredibly carefully. Can we just ask you one quick question, Jacob, on 0 hours contracts? Because obviously Angela Rayner said one thing...
We can hear what she said, actually.
Oh, we've got the clip.
Yeah,
Here we go.
Here's what she said.
Day one basic rights. A ban on 0 hour contracts, an end to fire and rehire, family-friendly working, strengthened sick pay, making it available to all workers, including the lowest earners.
So, Jacob, we don't get many commitments from this Labour Party. They're always U-turning, as you know. They've abandoned... the Starmer has abandoned every single pledge he was elected on as Labour leader. Here's a clear pledge to abolish 0 hour contracts from day one. 0 hour contracts, in my view, suit many people.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Also, it's worth bearing in mind that Labour councils use 0 hour contracts. Now, Labour councils up and down the country could abolish 0 hours contracts tomorrow if that's what they wanted to do, but actually they suit employees as well as employers. Also, no government ever does anything like that on day one because it would require legislation, and legislation takes time. So that promise is false simply on the technicalities of it.